The land wasn't just soil to me. It was blood, memory, and everything my family had ever built. When I walked its edges at dawn, I could still hear my father's laughter echoing off the trees, see my mother carrying baskets of apples from the orchard, and feel the same pride I felt as a boy when my boots sank into the damp earth after the rains. This place wasn't rich, it wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Every stone fence had been placed by our hands, every acre fought for with sweat. That's why, the morning I found the first neon surveyor's flag sticking up from the grass, my stomach dropped. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Kids playing? A prank? Maybe some utility company poking around without notice. But the deeper I walked across the pasture, the more of them I saw. Bright orange ribbons fluttering in the wind, slicing through my land like a warning. I stopped at the center, looking around. My land was being carved up right in front of me. By evening, I got my answer. A woman's voice, sharp, nasal, dripping with false sweetness, echoed across the property line. "Well, well, looks like someone's finally awake." That was the first time I saw her in person. Karen Whitmore. Everyone in the county already knew her by another name, the HOA Queen. But to me, she would always be something worse. The woman who smiled while stealing the very ground under my feet. She stood there in her spotless white blouse, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched high on her nose. Behind her, two men in hard hats were driving stakes into the dirt. On my dirt. "This isn't your land," I called out, my voice steady but burning. "What are you doing here?" Her smirk grew like she'd been waiting for that question. "Oh, honey, this has been settled. The HOA has approved development. We're building 35 new homes, and the buyers are already lined up. You should be proud. Your little wasteland is going to be a thriving community." I felt the ground shift beneath me, not from the soil, but from rage. I stepped closer, pointing toward the wooden sign they'd hammered into the grass. It read, "Future site of Willow Creek Estates." "That's my father's orchard. That's our pond. You can't—" "Oh, but we can," she cut me off, raising her hand like a schoolteacher scolding a child. "The paperwork is in order. The board approved everything. You should have kept up with your taxes, dear. You forfeited your rights a long time ago." Her words hit like a hammer, but I knew she was lying. I had the receipts. I had the deeds. My father's will. Every year I'd made sure nothing slipped through the cracks. She wasn't just trespassing. She was rewriting reality in broad daylight. I remember staring at her, at the way she tilted her head with that smug pity. The kind of look people give strays before shooing them away. For the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to be erased. The next days came like a storm. Trucks rolled in, fences went up, and suddenly my quiet fields were filled with machinery. The sound of hammers, drills, and engines drowned out the wind. They didn't even look at me when I stood at the edge of the property, watching. I yelled, I demanded explanations, but every time Karen would appear with her clipboard, wave her manicured hand, and say, "Call your lawyer if you have a problem." Neighbors I'd known since childhood stopped meeting my eyes. Some even congratulated her for beautifying the land. Beautifying. As if my family's sweat was ugly. As if orchards and streams weren't enough unless someone slapped concrete on them. At night, I sat on the porch with the old deed in my hands. My father's name on the yellowing paper, mine signed beneath it. Proof that this land wasn't theirs to take. But papers meant nothing if the whole town chose not to see them. The first real confrontation came a week later. They had cleared half the orchard, stumps raw and bleeding where trees once stood. Karen was walking the grounds like a queen inspecting her palace. I marched up to her, heart pounding. "You need to stop this now," I said, holding the deed out, like a shield. "This is mine. You know it. You can't just—" She leaned in, close enough that I could smell the artificial lemon scent of her perfume. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her smile never fading. "You can waive that little paper around all you want, but the county clerk's office sees things my way, and once the houses are up, no one will care what you say. 35 families are worth more than one bitter old man." My hand trembled around the deed, not from fear, but from fury. For a moment, I imagined tearing it into pieces right in front of her, because that's how useless it suddenly felt. She straightened, called out to the workers, and turned back to me. "Enjoy the view while it lasts. Your land isn't yours anymore. It's Willow Creek now." Her laughter followed me all the way back to the porch. That night, as I stared out at the flashing construction lights, something inside me shifted. The land wasn't just soil. It wasn't just memory. It was a promise. And I wasn't going to let her bury it under her empire of lies. The flood hadn't come yet, but in that moment, the water inside me began to rise. Karen's laughter still echoed in my ears the next morning when I stepped out onto the porch. The orchard was gone. What had once been rows of fruit trees planted by my father's rough hands was now an open wound of dirt and broken stumps. Trucks moved in and out, like an invading army. Every beep of their reverse gear was another nail hammered into the coffin of my family's history. But what hit me hardest wasn't the noise or the destruction. It was the way the workers avoided my eyes. Some of them I even knew. Men I'd shaken hands with at the diner. Men I'd bought feed with down at the supply store. Now they couldn't look at me. They worked fast, heads down, like they were ashamed but too afraid of Karen to stop. She strutted among them in her spotless heels, clipboard always in hand, pointing here, correcting there, her hair perfectly unmoved by the dust storm around her. I tried the sheriff's office that afternoon. Walked right in with my deed. My tax receipts, everything tucked in a folder so thick I could barely hold it straight. Sheriff Peterson barely looked at it. He just sighed, rubbed the back of his neck, and said, "Look, son, you're fighting the wrong battle. The county approved this. Karen's people have the permits. My hands are tied." "Permits based on what?" I snapped, slamming the papers down on his desk. "This is my land. My father worked his whole life for it. You think a signature from some crooked clerk makes that vanish?" He leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy with something that looked like guilt, but turned quickly into indifference. "I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's done. If you want to fight it, take it to court." Court. He knew what that meant. Time, money, endless hearings, all while Karen built her kingdom one slab of concrete at a time. That night, I lay awake listening to the rumble of machinery, the ground trembling like thunder as bulldozers moved across my land. Every thud of their work was a reminder that the law wasn't written for men like me anymore. It was written for people like her. People who smiled for cameras, donated to the right campaigns, and knew exactly whose pockets to line. Days turned into weeks. Foundations appeared. Wooden frames rose up, and suddenly the skeletons of houses covered what used to be rolling fields. Children ran among the beams, buyers already touring their future homes. They didn't see me standing in the distance, or if they did, They pretended not to. I tried the county office next, hauling my folder into the clerk's office like a soldier bringing his last weapon into battle. A young man at the desk flipped through my documents, shrugged, and said, "According to our system, that parcel's been rezoned for development. HOA acquisition. All legal." "Legal?" My voice cracked. "How do you call it legal to steal a man's land while he's still standing on it?" He avoided my gaze, muttered something about just following the system, and slid the papers back toward me as though they were contagious. That evening, Karen showed up herself. She didn't knock. She didn't even wait at the gate. She marched right up my driveway like she owned it, her heels crunching on gravel. "You've been busy," she said, sunglasses reflecting the last of the sun. "Sheriff, county clerk, zoning office, running around like some tragic old cowboy fighting windmills. Haven't you realized yet? This isn't your world anymore. It's ours." I clenched my fists. "You'll pay for this. One way or another, you'll pay." She tilted her head, that same smug smile plastered on her face. "Threats? Careful now. You wouldn't want the sheriff thinking you're dangerous. We wouldn't want you arrested while the neighborhood is still under construction, would we?" Her laughter cut the evening air like a blade as she turned and walked back to her car. I watched her taillights disappear, and I realized the truth. The system wasn't built to protect me. The court, the sheriff, the county, they were her shield, not mine. I was alone, but not powerless. Because as the houses rose higher, as the community Karen promised began to take shape, I remembered something my father had once told me. Standing by the dam he built with his own hands, water never forgets where it came from. It always finds a way back. I hadn't thought about the dam in years, but now it pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. And for the first time since Karen set foot on my land, I smiled. The smile didn't last long. The next morning, hammering echoed across the valley like war drums. By the time the sun climbed high, the first house frames had walls. 35 empty lots were fast becoming 35 polished cages, every nail driven into my heart. I tried one last push through the courts. I drove 2 hours to the city, spent money I didn't have on a lawyer who skimmed my documents, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Technically, you have a case, but realistically, it'll take years. By then the homes will be finished, families moved in. Judges don't like undoing communities once they're built." "Undoing communities?" I hissed. "It's undoing my life." He didn't flinch. He just tapped his pen against his desk. "Unless you can prove fraud, and that's hard, you're better off negotiating a buyout. Take a settlement and move on. Move on." As if my father's grave didn't rest under the oak tree by the stream. As if the dam and the fields and the orchard weren't carved into my very blood. A buyout was surrender. When I walked out of that office, the city noise swallowed me whole. Car horns, chatter, the smell of exhaust. None of it mattered. All I could think of was her face, that practiced smile, the way she'd leaned in and called me sweetheart while dismantling my world. By the time I drove back, the sun was setting. Karen was there again, right at the edge of my porch. She didn't bother with sunglasses this time. She wanted me to see her eyes, hard, glittering, full of victory. "You've done all you can, darling," she said, her voice syrupy. "The homes are coming. The buyers are eager. This land belongs to progress now. Don't be the old fool who clings to the past." I stepped closer, close enough she could hear the gravel crunch under my boots. "This land belongs to me. It will always belong to me." For the first time, her smile faltered, just a flicker. Then it returned, brighter, sharper. "You're finished. Don't embarrass yourself further." She pivoted on her heels and walked away, her perfume lingering, in the air like poison. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring out at the valley where the dam lay hidden. My father built it decades ago, with little more than grit and calloused hands. He used to tell me the dam was a promise, insurance for the family, a safeguard for dry years. But now, it felt like something else entirely. A weapon. The idea terrified me. Could I really do it? Open the gates? Let the waters rush free? Wipe away everything they'd stolen? The thought pulsed like a drumbeat. Images haunted me. The orchard, as it once was. My father's sweat-streaked face. My mother's voice calling me home for supper. And then, the contrast. Karen's sneer. The bulldozers tearing apart the soil. The laughter at the future community. Around midnight, thunder rolled across the hills. I walked out into the storm, boots sinking into mud, and made my way toward the dam. The air was thick, the sky alive with lightning. I stood on the concrete edge, staring down at the roaring water held back by steel and stone. My heart pounded in time with the waves. I rested my hands on the cold metal of the gate. One pull, and everything would change. Karen's empire, those houses, the lie of progress, all of it would be swept away. But my father's voice echoed in my head. "Water gives life, son. But misused, it takes it too." I let go. Not tonight. Not yet. Instead, I turned back toward the glow of construction lights on the horizon. I knew what I had to do. They thought they'd taken everything from me. But they'd forgotten one thing. The land still remembered me. And the dam was still mine. By the end of summer, Willow Creek Estates was no longer just a sign hammered into the dirt. It was rising fast, like a disease spreading across my veins. Roofs went up, driveways poured, mailboxes planted in neat little rows. The sound of children's laughter mixed with the growl of power tools as families paraded through with wide eyes, listening to Karen's honeyed promises about a safe, exclusive neighborhood with strong community values. Values. The word made me laugh bitterly. What value did she see in my land, besides dollar signs? Every time I tried to stand in her way, she cut me off. She slapped me with trespassing warnings on my own property. She posted security guards at the construction entrance, men in shiny black uniforms who treated me like a criminal. One even told me flat out, "Sir, step back. This isn't your land anymore." Those words stayed with me all night. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight. Not your land anymore. It was like they'd carved it into stone. When the foreclosure notice arrived in the mail, phony, forged, full of Karen's fingerprints, I drove straight to the county office. I stormed inside, slammed the notice on the counter, and demanded answers. The clerk barely glanced at it before sighing, "Everything looks in order, Mr. Hale." "In order?" My voice shook. "My mortgage was paid in full 3 years ago. You've got the wrong man." But I saw it in his eyes. He knew. They all knew. The system wasn't broken. It was built to let people like Karen win. On my way out, I passed Karen herself, heels clicking against the marble floor. She looked like she belonged there, a queen among peasants, while I was just a man shouting in the wind. She leaned close as she brushed past, her whisper sharp as a knife. "Stop embarrassing yourself. This is progress, and you're a relic. Enjoy your memories while they last." Her perfume stung my nose, and something inside me finally snapped. I didn't shout this time. I didn't wave papers or threaten lawyers. I just walked out, silent, like a man carrying a storm in his chest. That night, I returned to the dam. The storm from a week ago had filled the reservoir to the brim, the water pressing hard against the gates. I stood there in the moonlight, the roar of it vibrating through the steel, through my bones. My father had built this with nothing but grit. He had harnessed the wild river and tamed it, turned chaos into order. And now, I was thinking about turning order back into chaos. Walked the length of the dam, boots echoing against the concrete. Every step brought back memories, helping my father haul stones, patching leaks after spring floods, standing beside him when he told me, "This water is our legacy. Never forget that, son." I hadn't forgotten. Karen had. She thought she could bury my legacy under stucco walls and paved streets. She thought she could rewrite the history of this land with a few forged signatures. But water remembers. The next morning, I watched as Karen held a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the first completed house. The mayor stood beside her, grinning like a fool. Reporters snapped photos. Families clapped, cheering as she raised her scissors high. I was there, too, at the edge of the crowd. Nobody noticed me, a shadow among their celebration. But I was watching her every move, the way she soaked up the applause, the way she talked about a brighter future for our children while standing on the bones of my father's orchard. That night, I didn't go home. I walked straight back to the dam. My hands found the steel crank, slick with condensation. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break free of my chest. One turn. That was all it would take. The water pushed against the gate, begging to be freed, to run wild again, to sweep away the lies that choked my land. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Because the decision wasn't about anger anymore. It was about justice, and I knew, sooner or later, I would open the flood. Karen's ruthlessness grew with every nail driven into the frames of those houses. She wasn't content with stealing the land. She wanted to break me, grind me into dust so no one would ever question her power. Again, she started small, sending letters in bright envelopes stamped with the HOA seal. Violations, she called them. A broken fence post here. Unauthorized storage of my tractor there. Fines stacked up on paper like bricks in a wall, each one demanding money I didn't owe. When I tore them in half and threw them in the fire, she sent men to tack notices on my porch. Then came the police. 2 cruisers rolling up my driveway one morning, lights flashing though no crime had been committed. They told me to keep off the construction site, my land, or I'd be charged. One officer looked me in the eye, and I saw shame flicker there. But he still did his job, still treated me like a trespasser in my own home. Karen must have been watching from the road because when they left, her SUV glided up behind them. She stepped out, sunglasses glinting, her smile wide. "Well," she said, hands on her hips, "looks like we finally understand each other. You stay quiet, and maybe I'll let you keep your little shack for a while longer. But keep making trouble. And who knows? Maybe the board will vote to condemn it. Unsafe dwelling, they'll call it. Wouldn't want you living in squalor." I stared at her, silent, jaw tight. She thrived on my anger, on pulling me into her theater. But I wasn't going to give her that. Not anymore. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she leaned in close. "Progress always wins, darling. Get used to it." She drove off, leaving a cloud of dust that clung to my throat. That night, I walked the edge of the dam again. The moon cast silver across the water, the reservoir full and restless, slapping against the walls like a caged beast. I ran my hands over the steel gate, feeling the vibration of its hunger. I thought about the families moving into their new homes, about the children laughing as they ran across yards that weren't theirs. Were they guilty? Or just pawns in Karen's game? The question gnawed at me. I wasn't a cruel man, but cruelty was what Karen counted on. That I'd stay decent while she twisted the knife. Lightning split the sky, followed by the low growl of thunder. I gripped the crank, muscles tight, heart racing. One turn. That's all it would take. Images flashed through my mind. The orchard, my father's grave under the oak, the sheriff's weary eyes, Karen's smirk as she waved her clipboard like a sword. Then the flood I imagined, walls of water rushing down, sweeping away every false wall she'd built, washing her empire into mud and ruin. For the first time, I didn't feel fear at the thought. I felt clarity, but I didn't move. Not yet. Because a flood isn't something you release in anger. A flood is patient. A flood waits for the perfect moment, when no one expects it, when it leaves no chance for escape. So I let go of the crank and walked back into the storm, soaked to the bone, with the truth burning in my chest. Karen had won every battle so far, but the war was mine. And when I opened the dam, she wouldn't just lose her empire, she'd drown in the weight of her own lies. The day of reckoning came disguised as celebration. Karen had plastered flyers across town for the grand opening of Willow Creek Estates, a ribbon cutting, speeches from county officials, even a barbecue for the families who had bought in early. It wasn't just a ceremony, it was her coronation. The HOA Karen, queen of a stolen empire. By noon, the valley was alive with noise. Cars lined the road, children ran through yards that hadn't even settled yet, and the smell of grilled meat drifted through the air. A stage was set up near the first finished row of houses, bunting strung from one porch to another. Karen stood at the center in a red suit that blazed like fire, basking in the applause. I watched from the tree line, my fists tight at my sides. My land had been transformed into a carnival of lies. People cheered as if they were honoring her, the woman who had stolen everything from me. I saw the mayor shake her hand, the county clerk pat her back, and families smiling as if this was their promised dream. But the dream stood on stolen soil. When Karen stepped to the microphone, her voice carried across the crowd. "Today," she declared, "we celebrate progress, we celebrate community, and we celebrate the future of Willow Creek." Cheers erupted. Balloons lifted into the sky. She raised her scissors high, ready to cut the ribbon stretched across the first street. That was when I turned my back on them and walked to the dam. The sky had been threatening all morning, dark clouds rolling in low, heavy with rain. The air was thick, charged, the way it gets before a storm breaks. The reservoir churned, swollen from weeks of summer storms. Water foamed against the concrete, pressing harder than I had ever seen. It wanted out. I placed my hands on the steel crank, cold, solid, alive. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with certainty. I thought of my father's words. Water never forgets. It always finds its way back. Karen had stolen the land, mocked me, bent the law, turned neighbors against me. She believed she was untouchable. But water doesn't bow to signatures or boards or courts. Water answers only to gravity. I twisted the crank. At first, Nothing but a groan. Then a shudder. Then the gates began to move. Slow, grinding, like the earth itself was waking. And then, roar. A wall of water burst forth, white and furious, surging down the valley with unstoppable force. I staggered back, breath catching in my throat as the flood leapt free, rushing toward Willow Creek, toward Karen's empire. From the ridge above, I watched as the first wave slammed into the lower construction sites, ripping apart fences, swallowing half-built frames like they were paper toys. Screams rose up as people scrambled, running, slipping in mud, eyes wide with terror. Cars floated like driftwood, tents and chairs from the barbecue vanishing beneath the torrent. And then I saw her. Karen stood frozen on the stage, microphone still in hand, eyes wide in disbelief. The ribbon dangled uselessly at her side as the water tore through the street she had just christened. Her face twisted, not in fear at first, but in rage, like the flood itself was an insult she refused to acknowledge. She shouted something, waving her arms, but the roar drowned her out. Within seconds, the water was at her feet, ripping the stage from its supports. She stumbled, dropped the microphone, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw the mask crack. Panic. Pure, human panic. The crowd scattered, families screaming, neighbors dragging children through the chaos. But Karen clawed at the air as if she could command the flood, the same way she commanded everyone else. The current didn't care. It ripped through her new street, her model homes, her kingdom of lies, and carried it all away. From the ridge, I stood in the rain, chest heaving, eyes burning. I had expected triumph. I had expected the sweet taste of revenge. But what I felt instead was heavier. A strange silence inside me, even as the valley roared. The water had done its work. Willow Creek Estates was gone, reduced to mud and debris. Karen's voice, her laughter, her empire, washed away like dust. And my land was mine again. But as I stared at the wreckage, one truth cut through me like a blade. Water remembers, and so would everyone else. Chapter 7. The morning after the flood, silence wrapped the valley in a blanket thicker than fog. The roar of rushing water had subsided, leaving behind an eerie stillness, broken only by the dripping of soggy leaves and the occasional groan of a collapsing wall. The subdivision, once the pride of the HOA Karen and her cronies, was now a skeleton of splintered fences, overturned cars, and homes sagging like they had aged 100 years overnight. I stood on the ridge above it all, boots muddy, jeans stiff with dried river silt. From up here, I could see every inch of what had once been mine, what they had stolen. My land had reclaimed itself, swallowing the concrete and vinyl dreams of people who never understood its power. Karen herself was a different sight altogether. She was down by what used to be her front porch, a porch now tilted at an impossible angle, waterlogged furniture spilling out like broken bones. Her perfect hair hung in wet strings, her designer clothes stained with mud. She was screaming, not at the sky, not at the water, but at me. "You did this," she shrieked, voice cracking. "You'll pay for this. You'll rot in prison." Her accusations rolled over me like the last ripples of the flood. I didn't answer. Words felt too small for what had just happened. Instead, I kept my eyes on the water's trail, where it had carved out a new channel, snaking through what had been the HOA's centerpiece, an artificial fountain that now lay in shards. in shards. The authorities came soon enough. Sirens pierced the valley, and red and blue lights flashed against the gray sky. Police, firemen, rescue crews, they picked through the wreckage, searching for survivors, tallying losses. A sheriff I vaguely knew trudged up the hill toward me, his face unreadable. "You here when it happened?" he asked. I nodded. My voice felt far away when I spoke. I was here before it happened, too. Before they built anything. The sheriff studied me for a long moment, then let out a sigh that sounded heavier than the flood itself. "We'll need your statement," Karen's voice cut through the air again. "Arrest him! He sabotaged us! He opened that dam on purpose!" The sheriff turned toward her, then back to me. His eyes softened in a way that told me he already knew what Karen was, what she had done. "Lot of records got washed away last night," he said quietly. "Lot of things lost. But truth has a way of floating to the surface. For the first time in years, I felt the land breathe. Not with anger, not with resistance, with relief. Weeks passed, and investigations swirled like eddies in the aftermath of the flood. Reporters sniffed around, spinning tales of negligence, corruption, and greed. Every story seemed to circle back to the HOA, to Karen's name, to how corners had been cut and permits had been forged. The more they dug, the clearer it became. They had never owned this land. They had stolen it. One crisp morning, I stood at the courthouse steps as the final verdict was read. Karen sat inside, pale and silent, the fire gone from her eyes. She wasn't going to prison. People like her rarely did, but she was ruined in every way that mattered. The homes were condemned. Insurance refused to cover the losses. And her neighbors, once loyal, turned their anger on her like wolves scenting blood. As for me, the papers finally bore my name, beside the words I had fought years to see. Rightful owner. The land was mine again. Not in spirit, not in memory, but in law. But standing at the edge of the valley, I realized something. It had never been about a piece of paper. It had been about respect. Respect for the earth beneath us, for the quiet power of things people like Karen thought they could control. The subdivision would never rise again. Too risky, they said. Too unstable. But I didn't plan on rebuilding, either. Instead, I walked the fields, planting seeds where mud still clung to the roots. Trees, grasses, flowers. Life, not profit. The land didn't need fences, or manicured lawns, or HOA bylaws. It needed time to heal. Some evenings, when the sun slid low and the valley glowed gold, I swore I could hear the water still moving, whispering through the soil, reminding me of the night it reclaimed its voice. And in those moments, I finally understood. Karen had built her empire on my land, but the flood had washed away more than wood and stone. It had washed away her power, her lies, her hold over me. The land was mine again. No, more than that. I was its again. Do you want me to expand this ending with a more emotional aftermath, like Karen's personal downfall, community reactions, and the narrator's reflective closure? Or keep it sharp and cinematic like this? If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button to support more powerful stories like this. And if you believe in justice, loyalty, and the bond between humans and those who stand by them, then make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon, because the next story will leave you breathless. Share this with someone who needs to feel the power of hope today.